दिस इज आरजे याकूब एंड you're listening 88.4 FM पंचुल पल्स हिल से दिल तक। आज हमारे बीच एक कमाल की पर्सनैलिटी मौजूद है, एक ऐसी शख्सियत जिन्होंने फिलॉसफी को, दर्शन को बहुत गहराई से अध्ययन किया और इससे जुड़े जटिल से जटिल विषय को बहुत आसानी से बता देते हैं और समझा देते हैं और बहुत इंगेजिंग तरीके से। ऐसी कमाल की वेनरेबल डॉक्टर पूजा डबराल मैम, जो कि नालंदा यूनिवर्सिटी में असिस्टेंट प्रोफेसर हैं और आज हमारे बीच मौजूद हैं। सो मैम, फर्स्ट ऑफ ऑल आपका बहुत बहुत शुक्रिया हमारे बीच आने के लिए। एंड आई वुड लाइक टू आस्क यू फॉर द फर्स्ट क्वेश्चन, हाउ वुड यू डिस्क्राइब द हिस्टोरिकल इम्पोर्टेंस ऑफ नालंदा महावीरा in shaping Tibetan Buddhism thought?
Thank you, Yakub, and thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure for me to be part of this podcast recording. So your question is related to ancient Nalanda,
yes.
Right? So Prachin Nalanda Mahavihara or ancient Nalanda monastery, what we called, it comes actually, there is a seal which has been excavated from where we know the name. It is called Nalanda Mahavihara Bhikshu Sanghasya. So it's a monastic institution, first of all. Okay. And just to give you a brief historical background of it, so we talk about that it flourished from 4th to 5th century to 12th century AD. But of course, no major university comes overnight, so there must be, and there are evidences that before even 4th, 5th century, there used to be small viharas which were combined together and became a big university. In today's time, like for example, small colleges, they become one, and then the entire university comes into being. So ancient Nalanda was no exception. It was like the 5th century, the date we give is more like when it has become a very popular big university. And this was the world's first residential university, not in India, world's first residential university, where it is said that the Xuanzang, the Chinese traveler who wrote his travel account when he visited Nalanda at 7th century AD, he wrote a lot about ancient Nalanda Mahavihara, and he mentioned that how at the peak of ancient Nalanda there used to be 10,000 students and 2,000 acharyas, and who used to study there at resident. They were the residential teachers and students. It was like hostel system. And the UNESCO World Heritage Site in Bihar, the ancient site, there you see these artifacts, all the evidences are there about the hostels, the residence, and then the teaching hall, debate hall, all this. So now coming back to your question, that how this ancient Nalanda has contributed to Tibet. So before we come to Tibet, it's very interesting that how this ancient Nalanda has contributed to the globe, to the global spread of Buddhism. In 4th, 5th century, the Chinese masters who came to India, they studied at Nalanda, and then they not only studied, they researched at Nalanda with the proper debate system, and then when they went back, they took the Nalanda Buddhism to China. So this is how what we have in China is the Nalanda, where actually the masters who took it from Nalanda to China. And wherever Buddhism went from China, like Korea, Japan, or Vietnam, do you see the Nalanda traces went? Then in the later 7th, 8th century, the Buddhism took roots in Tibet. And then to do that, the dissemination of Buddhism in Tibet, the king of Tibet, King Trisongdesen, he played a very important role. What he did, he invited the Indian master, the Nalanda abbot of that time, by the name Acharya Shantarakshita, to Tibet, to have the Buddhism in Tibet. So along with Acharya Shantarakshita, who took the responsibility of disseminating the philosophical part of it, Guru Padmasambhava, the great Mahasiddha from India, he also was invited. And at that time in Tibet, there was a Bhyon religion. And then because it was a decree of the king, the whole, the king, the Acharya Shantarakshita, along with the Tantric Mahasiddha, Guru Rinpoche, they lovingly call him Guru Padmasambhava, they disseminated Buddhism there very successfully by subduing the already existing Bhyon tradition. So therefore, what we have in Tibet is a very pure form of ancient Nalanda, because when the Buddhism went to China, already Confucianism was very strong. But when it comes to Tibet, because it was the endeavor of the king, it was the level of the kings. So therefore, no opposition from any side, and also the pure. And then both of them, this Acharya Shantarakshita and Guru Padmasambhava, they established first monastery in Tibet called Samay Monastery, and they ordained the monks there in the ancient Nalanda tradition of Vinaya or monastic lineage. So therefore, the Tibetan Buddhism that we have today, in exile here in India, this is a very pure form of ancient Nalanda tradition.
Okay. So, what role did Indian masters play in transmitting Buddhism knowledge India to Tibet?
Thank you. So it connects to where we were. So Acharya Shantarakshita is the first one who was invited.
Okay.
So when he went there along with Guru Padmasambhava, so the first time Tibet saw the glimpses of Buddhism. Before that, they used to call it one more like a animalistic religion, Bhyon religion. And then after introducing it, so what Acharya Shantarakshita is a Madhyamaka philosopher from the 4 schools of philosophical Buddhism. There are 4: Vaibhashika, Sautantrika, Chittamatra and Madhyamaka. And Acharya Shantarakshita followed the Madhyamaka, which dates back to Arya Nagarjuna and taught by Buddha Shakyamuni in Pragya Paramita Sutras in Rajgir, in Bihar and multiple places in India. So this is how you can take it back to the Buddha Shakyamuni. And then when Acharya Shantarakshita disseminated Buddhism there, it was majorly the Madhyamaka philosophy along with all other 4 schools. So now then slowly, that school is the oldest school in Tibet, which is called the Nyingma. So for Nyingma, the Acharya Shantarakshita's teaching and Acharya Shantarakshita's monastic discipline and the debate tradition is very important. Then later on, the other schools came into being, which the 4 schools of Tibetan Buddhism are called the Nyingma, Kagyu, Sakya and Gelug. And then it so happened that around the 9th, 10th century, there was a dark period again in Tibet. Means the king Langdharma, he persecuted Buddhism and it disappeared almost. So then again, the king of that time, very visionary, he invited another Nalanda master. His name was Acharya Atisha, 11th century, and he was very famous and associated with 2 monasteries, Nalanda and Vikramashila also. So, and also it is said he also part of the Odantapuri. So then he was invited and he again disseminated Buddhism there and wrote a text called Bodhipath Pradeep in Tibet, which was sent back to India for the Indian scholars. So many Nalanda masters like Acharya Shantarakshita, then Kashmiri Shakyastri, and then Acharya Atisha Dipankara Shri Gyana, they went and traveled to Tibet for dissemination. Those who did not travel also, like Master Naropa, Master Tilopa, and then Master Virupa, they play a very important role when it comes to 4 schools of Tibetan Buddhism. So, if I may have to tell you like this, the Nyingma, they trace it back to the Acharya Shantarakshita of Nalanda. Then the Kagyu, they trace it back to Master Naropa of Nalanda. Then the Sakyas, they trace it back to Master Virupa. And then the Gelugpas, they trace it back to Master Atisha. So all 4 schools that exist in Tibet, they revered for their lineage as Indian Nalanda masters.
Okay. So ma'am, how did core philosophical system like Madhyamaka and Yogacharya travel from India to Tibet?
So along with Acharya Shantarakshita. So as I just mentioned that Acharya Shantarakshita was a Madhyamaka scholar. And within Madhyamaka there are, so these are the technical details basically. Within Madhyamaka there are schools. One is called Swatantrika Madhyamaka and one is called the Prasangika Madhyamaka. Then within Sautantrika also there are 2, Sautantrika, Swatantrika, Madhyamaka and Yogacharya, Swatantrika, Madhyamaka. So Acharya Shantarakshita belongs to the Yogacharya, Swatantrika, Madhyamaka. So there where the amalgamation or the insights of both the Yogacharya and Madhyamaka school is there. So when he disseminated Buddhism there, his philosophical treatises and his student also, Acharya Kamalashil, went to Tibet. Because it so happened that China at that time, suddenly wrong meditation practices started to percolate, particularly when the Chinese master Huyan was there and the Chan tradition came, the Chinese meditation tradition, they started to talk about the emptiness as complete blank or the nothingness state of mind. And seeing that many were being drawn to that practice, which is actually a very shallow practice and not the real understanding of shunyata, which was very important for Madhyamaka tradition. Then they invited Acharya Kamalshil, who was the direct student of Acharya Shantarakshita. And then at the presence of the king, they both debated. Acharya Shantarakshita from India and the Chinese master. And then the one legend has it that the Acharya Shantarakshita won the debate and established the correct form of meditation on emptiness in Tibet. So this is how the Yogacara and the Madhyamaka tradition and the thoughts are there in Tibet.
Okay. So in what way does the Nalanda tradition continue to influence Tibetan Buddhism today?
So in multiple aspects. One I'll say is the content. Second is the methodology that they use, and third is the Vinaya, the ethical discipline. So these three things are the major influence where you can see the ancient Nalanda tradition still is there in the entire spirit of Tibetan Buddhism. So for example, when it comes to the content, the ancient Nalanda used to have the Panch Mahavidyas, the five major sciences, and within the five major sciences they were like Pramana Vidya, the science of the logic and debate, then the Shabda Vidya, the science of the languages, then the Chikitsa Vidya, the science of medicine, then the what you call it Adhyatma Vidya, the science of the philosophy, and also there used to be Shilpa Vidya, the science of the art and skills. So from that, the Arya Sangha, one of the master, in his book called Bodhisattva Bhumi, he clearly mentions that any person who was being trained at ancient Nalanda, he used to study all five. But from that, the Adhyatma Vidya was considered the most important, because all other sciences will at the most give you the benefit or the facilities of this life, whereas the Adhyatma Vidya, that was done for the sake of enlightenment, for the sake of nirvana, moksha. So that was the most important. But while you are working towards the moksha, enlightenment, and the society, and Nalanda was so majorly connected with the society, and then and therefore all other are to sustain you while you are going in that pursuit. So within Adhyatma Vidya, there used to be five major areas where they used to study. One is called the Vinaya, the ethical discipline. Then the second is called Pragya Paramita literature, the perfection of wisdom, Shunyata, a study, and emptiness we call it. Then the Abhidharma, it talks about the cosmology and phenomenology and all the science of the particles and all. Then there is the Praman, which is the logic and debate, and then the epistemology. And finally, there is also what is called the Abhisamalankara or Paramitas, the practice of the Bodhisattvas, how to engage with the society and benefit the world, right? So all these five used to be the major concern or major studies within the Adhyatma Vidya, which was the most important science in ancient Nalanda. So now if you go to the Tibetan schools now, which survive, like all four schools, Nyingma, Kagyu, Gelug and Sakya, they still have that study of the five major texts. So they still, so in the terms of the content, if you go to Bailakopi, there are three major Gelug monasteries, Sera, Ganden, Drepung. Their curriculum is based on these five major texts. So the content is exactly which was emphasized at ancient Nalanda, number one. Second is the methodology, that what kind of pedagogy they use. So pedagogy is exactly like ancient Nalanda, which is the debate tradition, right, the oral tradition. They, even in monasteries there, at a very higher stage, they start to write. Otherwise, everyday engagement is like the teacher speaks for a lecture, and after that, the students debate that content, like what is Shunyata, what is the purpose of life, and what is universal love and compassion, how to take care of the entire world, all this, and what is the true nature of reality, what is the nature of the particle, do they exist intrinsically or not, and how does the self exist intrinsically or not. So Shunyata says that the self does not exist intrinsically. So all these questions are debated with a proper debate structure, which used to be the case in ancient Nalanda. So the pedagogy is also the exactly same. And finally, the ethical discipline, the practice part. So again, the Vinaya, that monastic tradition that Tibet has, all four schools, this was started by Acharya Shantarakshita. And that Vinaya tradition is called Mool Sarvastivada. So in Tibet, all the monastics, they are into Mool Sarvastivada Vinaya lineage, which was spread by the ancient Nalanda master, Acharya Shantarakshita. So both, so in terms of curriculum, content, in terms of pedagogy, the debate style, and in terms of the practical, the ethical discipline, all come from very pure lineages of ancient Nalanda.
So ma'am, can we say that Tibetan Buddhism represent a continuation of the Nalanda tradition?
Definitely so.
Okay.
As brief as possible. This is the most, if you want to know about ancient Nalanda, as we know, it's sadly, vanished from India in 12th century because of decline and also because of the foreign invasions. So now, and this was the real treasure of India, And when I went to Indonesia recently, Mongolia, and also I went to South Korea. So when they came to know that I come from ancient Nalanda, in fact, I was so amazed to know that Indonesia, Jakarta has a Nalanda Institute in the name of Nalanda. And they were so happy that somebody has come from Nalanda because they revere one master called Acharya Atisha himself, who went to Indonesia also. And then while in India, Nalanda University was flourishing from 5th to 12th century. A parallel university flourished in Indonesia, in Jambi, called Mora Jambi. That was from 7th to 14th century. So the architecture of that, now the studies are going on, the architecture of that is very much resembles the ancient Nalanda. And there was a continuous exchange of Indonesian master and then the ancient Nalanda masters. So I was so happy to see that how globally Nalanda still survives, right? And it lives in the spirit of Buddhist people there. And then, so therefore, but now when you talk about that, that we lost that treasure of all the texts, that Shastras that was written by the great Indian Nalanda masters. But one tradition which preserved all of them, 108 volumes of Buddha's direct words called Sutras, they call it Kangyur, and then the 225 volumes of the Indian Shastras written by the Indian masters, they were already translated in Tibetan. And then what they are doing now, if you go to Saranath, they are back translating from Tibetan to Sanskrit. And therefore, if one tradition which has preserved it so well is the Tibetan tradition of Buddhism. And therefore His Holiness clearly says that, I have nothing of mine. My body comes from Indian dal and rice, and my mind comes from ancient Nalanda. So whatever we have is from India.
Okay, so ma'am, how would you explain the contribution of Nagarjuna in the concept of shunyata, emptiness?
So thank you for this question. It is actually my PhD research is on Āṛya Nagarjuna, the great Indian Nalanda master. And I say him great not because I worked on him. It is because all the Indian masters who followed him, they wrote something on his writings. So he is the most celebrated Nalanda master, who is also revered as second Buddha. They revered because of his particularly concept of shunyata and emphasis on universal love and compassion through the practice of bodhicitta. He became very prominent teacher who wrote multiple texts, 5 major texts on Madhyamaka philosophy, emptiness. And all the later Nalanda masters like Acharya Buddhapalita, Acharya Bhavaveka, Acharya 𝐒𝐤𝐴𝐜𝐿, Acharya Chandrakirti, Acharya Bhavaveka, Acharya Bodhisattva Shantideva, they wrote treatises to explain what shunyata is, what Āṛya Nagarjuna is saying. And although they had debates among each other, but all accepted that Āṛya Nagarjuna's view of shunyata is the final correct view of shunyata, which has been taught by Buddha Shakyamuni in Pragya Paramita Sutras during his lifetime. So therefore, Āṛya Nagarjuna is something who is considered extremely authentic when it comes to shunyata. So what is shunyata is, this is a very profound topic. This is the essence of Buddha's teaching, I would say, that Buddha Shakyamuni is coming on this earth. If somebody asks what are the 2 legacies he left, one should explore. One is called shunyata and other is called bodhicitta. Shunyata is in English, if we have to translate it, it is emptiness. It is translated as emptiness, but it's sometimes gives a very wrong impression that nothingness, nothing exists. That's not emptiness at all. And on the other side is the bodhicitta, meaning the universal love and compassion. So Buddha said that we need both. We need wisdom and we need compassion. If only compassion, then you cannot be liberated from your fears. And if only wisdom, then your wisdom will confine you only to your liberation and others will continue to suffer. So somebody who can bring the two things, wisdom of shunyata plus universal love and compassion of bodhicitta together, this person will not suffer him or herself, and also will make sure that they benefit all sentient beings, the way Prince Siddhartha did, right? So there where the shunyata becomes very important. Just to give you a brief, because this is very, very important topic. Shunyata is something, many people they say that 𝐴𝐼 Nagarjuna is the one who, taught shunyata. This is a complete misunderstanding. 𝐴𝐼 Nagarjuna is nothing but a follower of Buddha Shakyamuni's teaching. And he was in fact coming from South India. He studied all the Indian darshanas, Sankhya, Nyaya, Mimamsa, all the Vedanta, which were very important and studied by any philosopher. And then he debated these traditions, these philosophies, and then he finally systematized through his engagement with these. He systematized what Buddha taught as shunyata because of his advocacy and his belief in the shunyata concept, emptiness. And there he wrote the 5 major texts to explain this. Mool Madhyamaka Karika, Vigraya Vardhani, then also something related to how particles are also empty of intrinsic nature, Vaidalya Prakarana. So 5 major texts he wrote, and besides that he wrote multiple texts where he addressed king of Satavahan dynasty. Like 2 major texts are there, Ratnavali and Surle, where the king is asking that, okay, I want to attain enlightenment, Samyak Sambodhi, which Buddha did, but I don't want to leave my kingdom. So is there a way out? So then he, advising the king, he wrote 2 letters to the king. One is called Ratnavali and one is called Surle, where he is advising the king how to attain enlightenment while you are taking care of the kingdom. So those texts you will see are very important, like Arthashastra text. Very important for the governance, ethical administration, ethical diplomacy, ethical business. There he gives the advice to the king that, okay, while you are working towards your enlightenment, you have to take care of all these measures at your kingdom. So these 2 texts again very important. Now coming back to shunyata. Shunyata sometime, so what I said is that this is the first time taught by Buddha Shakyamuni in Pragya Paramita Sutras, called Perfection of Wisdom Sutras, as a solution to all the fears. So when he left the palace, he did not leave the palace because he was very happy. He left the palace because he was very unhappy, seeing that how the stronger were bullying the weaker one. The wars were happening amongst the kingdoms, and then so much of bloodshed, and then people did not have any control over their emotions. Any time anybody can die, and one has to suffer. So seeing all this dissatisfaction, when he left the palace, he met his 2 main teachers. One was the Acharya 𝐴𝐼 and Acharya 𝐿, and both are believed to be in the Sankhya darshan. And then when he met them, then he studied first with Acharya 𝐴𝐼, and after Acharya 𝐿 was said to be the most, like somebody who has reached a very high level in samadhi in those times. A very good practitioner and a great revered teacher, and who had multiple disciples. But then when Prince Siddhartha studied with him and then reached the same level as Acharya 𝐿, and then Acharya 𝐿 said that, now Siddhartha, there is no difference between you and me. Why don't you continue? I am very old, you take my students and teach them. So then Siddhartha said that, okay, thank you for all the teachings, but still I don't see this as the solution to all the fears of sentient beings, solution to all the pains of sentient beings. So I would like to continue my journey to find the truth, that okay, what is the cause of suffering and how I can eliminate it. So please give me permission. So then he left and he met his Acharya 𝐴𝐼 teacher, Acharya 𝐿. He was the top in Samadhi, in Sankhya in those times. And then again reaching the same stage, he left there. And then with the 6 years practice after he left the 2 teachers, 6 years he meditated, he reflected, and what he discovered is the shunyata to be the solution to all the problems and fears. And then the first verse, and after he became enlightened under the Bodhi tree in Bodh Gaya, he was not teaching. And then the many teachers and many beings of the celestial realm, they came to him and said, Siddhartha, you left the palace to benefit sentient beings, right? And now that you have discovered the wisdom or the truth of shunyata, which can actually liberate all, you are not teaching, so you should teach. So he remained silent for 49 days, it is said. 7 weeks he remained silent and did not teach. And then he said one verse in Lalita Vistar Sutra, that profound, peaceful, elaboration free, clear light and non-composite, such is the nectar-like dharma of emptiness I have discovered. Finding no one to fathom this teaching, in silence I will retire into woods. So what basically he's saying that the solution that I've found is not some simple, it's very profound and it is very peaceful. It needs to be studied and practiced and meditated upon for a very long time. So that is where he talked about shunyata, called swabhav shunyata, that it's not nothingness, that it simply means, if I have to explain in very few words, that nothing in this world exists intrinsically with swabhav. Everything exists through dependence, through dependent origination, right? Nothing in this world, and within dependent origination, he taught multiple layers, that how things exist by dependence on causes and condition. So there are no magics, right? If you want to attain the same stage, put effort, and there is no difference between you and me. And then he also taught the dependence, how things exist purely by dependence on mental imputation. Right, that how everything is dreamlike, right? So that concept came to known as the shunyata. Nothing exists intrinsically and everything is dependently originated. So this idea was further taken, and then after Buddha Shakyamuni's passing away, again this idea, this Madhyamaka philosophy became very dormant. There were great siddhas who were practicing it, but not as prominently as other schools of Buddhism. So then Nagarjuna, in around 2nd century AD, he revived that tradition. He revived that philosophy of shunyata through his writing. So therefore, he became very prominent that, okay, somebody who knows the exact meaning of the shunyata as explained by Buddha Shakyamuni, which is the crux of how to remove all your fears, that is Ārya Nagarjuna.
Okay, so what makes the Madhyamaka philosophy cornerstone of Tibet Buddhism thought?
Again, very important question. So now Ārya Nagarjuna's text, as I said, he explained shunyata in 5 major texts. Then many masters wrote commentary on that, and there are polemics, means debates that they did, that okay, you know, what is exactly this shunyata, because as Buddha Shakyamuni said, it was a very profound topic, and many people, they went to the extent of shunyata means nihilism, or just blank your thoughts and then you will attain shunyata. No, so to clarify that doubt, so many masters like Acharya Buddha Palita, Acharya �սկ𝐽𝐬, Acharya Bhavveka, Acharya Chandrakirti, Acharya Shantaradeva, Acharya 𝐾𝐿𝐴𝐿, Acharya Shantarakshita, they wrote explanation of Ārya Nagarjuna's shunyata in their treatises. And then when Acharya Shantarakshita went to Tibet, so in his Madhyamaka work, which inspired from Ārya Nagarjuna, the whole shunyata philosophy took root in Tibet. So now the 4 major schools of Tibetan Buddhism, which is Nyingma, then Kagyu, then Sakya and Gelug, all 4, they emphasize the philosophy of shunyata as taught by Ārya Nagarjuna. So they may debate with each other, but they all claim that, okay, we are the follower of Madhyamaka philosophy, which was given to us by Acharya Shantarakshita, Acharya 𝐾𝐿𝐴𝐿, Acharya Atisha, Acharya Bodhisattva Shantideva, but finally coming from the great master Ārya Nagarjuna. So all of them, they finally, while they study all 4 schools, they try to get to the understanding of Ārya Nagarjuna's shunyata as taught by in the Madhyamaka system.
Okay, so could you elaborate on the role of Tsongkhapa in interpreting shunyata?
Exactly. So now this is the other part of my dissertation, the thesis that I wrote. So I worked on the Ārya Nagarjuna's shunyata and how the debates around it in Indian Nalanda, by the Indian Nalanda master, and in Tibet. So Tsongkhapa is the one who is the founder of the Gelug school of Tibetan. Yes, out of the 4, and he is somebody who is revered in Tibet as second Buddha, second omniscient one, because of his volumes of writing he has written to clarify the view of emptiness. And then through his writing, particularly what is called Umagombarapsel in Tibetan, in English it is translated by Thupten Yimpa now, very beautiful volume. It is called Illuminating the Intent. And also Tsongkhapa has written a direct commentary on Ārya Nagarjuna's Mool Madhyamika Karika called Ocean of Reasoning, already translated by 𝐺𝐿. There he explains what Ārya Nagarjuna says about emptiness, because as I mentioned, in Tibet also, because of the Chinese influence, slowly they started to see emptiness as a practice of complete nothingness and blank state. And it was much easier, right? You stay in the blank state of mind and then, you know, you just meditate on that. So this kind of meditation were percolating, and then seeing the danger of, you know, the shunyata being misperceived. And then it is like, if you turn the medicine into poison, then it is harmful. So therefore, Acharya Shanta Rakshita's student, Acharya Kamalashila, was invited to clarify what shunyata is as taught by Arya Nagarjuna. So then they debated in front of the king, and then explaining that shunyata is not nothingness, it is actually the emptiness of intrinsic nature. Swabhav shunyata, that nothing has intrinsic nature, everything exists through dependent origination, which Buddha taught as pratitya samutpad. And one who understands emptiness, what are the mark of it also were explained. That what you understand, if you understand emptiness, your belief in law of karma should increase. And your love and compassion for the sentient being should increase. Means your mind expands to all, and your belief in law of karma increases, and you should follow the middle way. Only when these things are happening, you are understanding the shunyata as taught by Arya Nagarjuna, coming back from Buddha Shakyamuni.
Okay, so ma'am, how important is dialectical debate in preserving Nagarjuna philosophy in Tibet?
So this example that I gave you, that the meditation slowly turned towards the wrong understanding of shunyata.
Right.
Even today's scholars, many Western scholars, European scholars, they called Arya Nagarjuna as nihilist, not understanding emptiness to mean the emptiness of intrinsic nature. They thought that emptiness simply means nothingness, right? And this is the danger comes when there is no debate and dialectics.
Okay.
So only when there are debates and dialectics, so that's why I also focused on this area, that how the Indian masters, particularly there is a very famous polemics that happened is between Acharya Buddhapalita, Acharya Bhavaveka and Acharya Chandrakirti. Different centuries, but he explained Arya Nagarjuna's shunyata first, Acharya Buddhapalita. Then Acharya Bhavaveka wrote a commentary and said that, okay, there is some, not a correct understanding.
Right.
Then Acharya Chandrakirti wrote another commentary in later centuries and said that actually Acharya Bhavaveka's view is correct, and Acharya Bhavaveka's view is more tilting towards Svatantrika Madhyamaka. So this debate and the polemics, the discussion they used to have when it comes to truth, no compromise. It's not that, okay, even if we all follow the same Buddhist tradition, but when it comes to truth, it should be rigorously analyzed. Because it is not about, you and me, it is about the liberation. Because
right.
only if you know the right truth, you can meditate it and liberate yourself from all the kleshas, afflictions, destructive emotions, which everybody wants. And therefore, this debate tradition, like in today's time, what mathematics does was physics. If the physics does not have the rigor of mathematics, it will become very dilute. Many stories can kick in. But and likewise for the philosophy, debate did that part. Logic did that. It's called Pramana Vidya in the ancient Nalanda. So with the logic and debate, there was no danger that you slide into blind faith. You have to question whatever truth you are going to experience. You don't accept anything out of blind faith. In fact, Buddha Shakyamuni himself asked in one of the sutra, he said, these are very interesting words one should know. He said, bhikshus and wise men, just as a goldsmith tests the purity of the gold by cutting, rubbing and burning the gold, so you should examine my word and put them into practice. Don't accept them simply out of respect for me. So he gave the liberty to his disciple that even if it comes to my words, you scrutinize it, you analyze it through debate and discussion. So that is the very important for one not to slide into wrong views and keep the truth as it is.
Okay, so ma'am, can shunyata be seen as a universal philosophical concept beyond religious boundaries?
Very important question. In fact, this is, I think, one of the questions that we should take at the level of education in country. So as I said, shunyata, it's like, for example, gravity, right? Gravity is not religion, right? Okay, Christian gravity or Buddhist gravity. Only Buddhist people will fall and the Christians will fly, right? No, gravity works for all, right? Because it's a truth, right? So likewise, Buddha Shakyamuni did not invent shunyata. He discovered. Shunyata is the nature of all phenomena since time immemorial. Since time immemorial, nothing exists intrinsically. Everything comes into being by dependence on multiple factors, including your mind playing your role. Right? And this Buddha Shakyamuni discovered. Not discovering it, it's like, for example, the Madhyamaka gives the example of dream. That in the dream, if in the dream there is a ghost chasing you, and then what is our reaction? We are scared, right? And then we run. We run and then we fall, right? And then the ghost comes and grab at your neck and then you wake up. and then what is the reaction? You relieve with sigh that thankfully it's a dream. So why in the dream you were suffering, and when you woke up you were freed of suffering? What is the major problem with the dream is that ignorance of not seeing the reality, that it is just my own dream, this is my mental creation, my mental imputation. Nothing, the ghost in the dream is also not there from its intrinsic nature. It is purely mentally imputed. And likewise, everything in the dream is not there intrinsically, it is mentally imputed. It comes into being by dependence on my own mind. Not knowing this, you suffer in the dream. Sometimes happiness is there in the dream, sometimes sadness is there, and then you wake up and both are transcended. Right. So likewise, when Buddha taught this philosophy of shunyata, he explained this, that this is the reality of all phenomena, that how they exist by dependence on mental imputation, by dependence on cause and condition. They exist, but they do not exist intrinsically. So this is something, a fact, not with Buddhist or non-Buddhist. It is something, the nature of all phenomena. It's like, the quantum physics talks about the nature of the particles and the waves, right? Nobody questions them that who is the scientist. Scientist is a Japanese, or scientist is a Christian or Buddhist. This is a scientific fact. So this is something where we have to be very, very objective, that this has nothing to do with the religion. This is the fact that everybody should know to be freed of the fears of ignorance. Just as in the dream, only when you wake up and you see dream as dream, then only you will be freed of fears of dream, right? So likewise, until unless we see that nothing exists in this world independently on its own, but by dependence, then some kind of afflictions will always try to bother us and create fear. And therefore, emptiness not only can be seen as a universal phenomena, must be included in all the subjects. And I'm very happy that, in our, where in linguistics also, 𝐴𝐹 Nagarjuna is studied, because his philosophy that nothing exists intrinsically, everything exists through mental imputation and through designation of labels. The sound and the language becomes very important, is studied. And also he has contributed to governance and administration through his two texts, as I mentioned, 𝐂𝐜𝐴𝐿 and Ratnavali, where international relations should look at it. Then where the logic and debate studies are happening, he has given the entire system of Chatushkoti. So Socrates' dialectic is so famous in the world. Nobody asks that which religion. They follow it for the training of the mind. So likewise, 𝐴𝐹 Nagarjuna's Chatushkoti is very important for logic and debate. Likewise, his ethics that he taught in Bodhicitta Vivaran, that has to be incorporated in the study of the ethics and then the peace and conflict resolution. So there where you can see 𝐴𝐹 Nagarjuna philosophy has contributed to multiple disciplines. And to our amazement, already scientists are, like quantum physicists, they closely cherish 𝐴𝐹 Nagarjuna's philosophy, because now quantum physics, in the physics, is taking a turn. Earlier physics never accepted the role of mind, but now the quantum physics has come, and it was like a revolution in the physics also. And quantum physics says that how the observer plays a very important role when it comes to determining the nature of the particle. So this has been said by 𝐴𝐹 Nagarjuna in Mool Madhyamaka Karika, that how even the particle exists through mental imputation. There is no intrinsic nature. So there where they are already collaborating. Again, his philosophy is also used by the neuroscientists and psychologists to understand the nature of the mind. So there where we can see 𝐴𝐹 Nagarjuna is a universal phenomena, and particularly his shunyata should be without any biases become part of the study. Let students study and decide.